How's it going, YouTube? Hot Soup here, your resident New World dungeon rat. You played New World long enough, and there are aspects you can definitely point to and say, that's because they rushed this game to launch, isn't it? Whether it's the floating trees and other open world objects in the game, half-baked gearing systems, an unintuitive UX and UI implementation, an atrocious repetitive slapped-on questing system, and unfortunately, the topic of this video, the early expeditions, or dungeons, as everyone who's played a video game calls them. As a gentle reminder, these are the Aint excavation, the worst of the bunch in my opinion, but it gets somewhat of a pass because it's an intro dungeon. Starstone Burrows, which is a slight upgrade from Aint, but glaringly copy-pasted from it. And then the
Hansu.
The Depths Mutation came into the Mutation rotation, that's a mouthful, for the first time this week. And of course, new content, and yeah, air quotes the size of Milwaukee here, is always welcome. It's glaringly obvious the Depths dungeon is the result of a rush job. It's not all bad, there are some high points, but for the most part, it's a big stinker. Compared to their more recent efforts, like the Tempest Heart Expedition, or even the Dynasty Shipyards, which I still feel is the most tightly designed and well thought out dungeon in the game, the Depths falls short in almost every category of fun in terms of an MMO dungeon. And hey, I realize the devs have just ignored their families on weekends to hand us a pretty great PvP-focused patch. Then they have to turn to the side and dump the leftovers to the PvE crowd in the form of this mutation. We're essentially told to please enjoy this for the next few months while we slave away at finishing barnacles and black powder sometime this summer. Ha 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 ha. As I said in another video, realistically, we're about 3 months away from a new expedition coming through. I feel for them, I really do. Having to cater to such diametrically opposed player bases is no easy feat, and pumping out significant content each month for both is a nigh impossible task. But AGF seems to be trying to do that. Time will tell if they can actually pull it off. So far, it ain't working so great. All that said, even as a fan of the game and sympathetic to the situation, I have to call it as I see it. This dungeon sucks. There are some really cool drops in the dungeon. This Holy Pleasures band, which drops from Commander Thorpe, is pretty incredible. It has Sacred, Brilliant, and Refreshing. I mean, that's pretty much a best-in-slot ring for a healer. Commander Thorpe also drops his Expedition Captain set, which is a great Corruption Ward tanking set, and the helmet actually glows. I've seen it in-game. It looks friggin' awesome. I've seen some people say this Willing Sacrifice sword is great for tanking as well, but I don't think those people know what they're talking about. Anyone who tanks seriously knows the hated perk is kind of wasted in that slot. It barely does anything for you. You're better off pumping up your damage or crits to hold threat better. But I think most of my server is chasing after this amulet, Blessing of Forefathers. It's basically considered best in slot for tanks and bruisers. This one drops from the priest, who's essentially the first boss in the dungeon, but divine, health, and fortified recovery, I mean, that's pretty friggin' great. But yeah, that's really it. The rest, as I said, is kind of junk or has an equivalent in another dungeon. There's a lot of epic items that have a random third perk roll if you manage to get a 600 GS drop, which is just another gambling source for people. It seems like this is now the way they're going to be handling it, because we first saw it in the Tempest Heart dungeon, and now in the Depths, and I think it's just the way they're going to go forward now on the drops. The theme of the dungeon is kind of all over the place. It seems to me this is an ancient space of some kind that's been taken over by the corruption. It's the same conceit for the Aint excavation, except in there, the lost mobs have taken over. I think the devs just had a limited tile set when they were building this, so they just were using what they had, which is kind of sad. So what makes this such a poor experience? I think it's just all the trash you have to mow through. And they put you in these really tight, narrow corridors. You're just going down hallways. It kind of reminded me of Final Fantasy 13, and not in a good way. You're just constantly seeing the same mob over and over again. You do mass pulls. You do a lot of AoE damage. There's really no challenge in this. I really thought they could have done a better job here when they released the mutation version, but they really didn't. They just upped the HP on everything and expect you to mow through it. So the layout stinks. The mobs aren't very inspired. So let's talk about the bosses. Now, the unique mechanic for the first boss fight, where the team has a split in order to stop the boss of channeling the minds, is clever and fun. It's actually one of the highlights of the dungeon. The final Thorpe fight, being in such a tight space, is also a good check on whether your tank is any good about holding threat, positioning, and dodging. But everything else about these two fights is pretty terrible. They are just tank and spanks. Thorpe's mechanics are telegraphed heavily. You have to remember they built this dungeon for level 45 players who are still, I guess, learning the game. Is more of a tutorial type dungeon. I just feel like this was a bad idea to just make a straight mutation without any changes whatsoever. They could have done a lot more here. This is really low effort. I'm already finding it hard to get groups to do the lower mutations. I think people just rushed up to the higher end and are grinding it for those drops that I mentioned. It still falls short of Tempest. I think people would prefer to do Tempest Heart because of the rewards. And just, overall, it's just a better dungeon. Now, Dynasty Shipyards is rarely ever played because people just find it too difficult. I think Depths will surpass Dynasty in that sense. I think you'll see more people running Depths than Dynasty in terms of corruption dungeon option. We're already seeing sub 20-minute times on gold clears at M9 and M10. So I think this will be a good option if you want to speed run through a dungeon and get some umbrals at the higher end. Like I said, the fights aren't very difficult, to be honest. So that's my 2 cents on the Depths mutation. Remember, this isn't a guide. I just wanted to give you my feedback on it. Not quite the experience I was hoping for. I hope they don't push out the Amarin and Starstone dungeons as is. Those need some severe work to be satisfying mutation dungeons. I think the devs has said that in the past, but who knows? They seem to change their mind a lot. Will this hold my interest until the Lost Dungeon comes out, which I'm super excited for? I'm not sure. Most of my sets have been upgraded to 625. Summer family responsibilities are getting busier for me, and the population of the game continues to hemorrhage. These next 2 months are going to be rough for the game. But I want to thank you for making it this far. If you like my content, please give me a thumbs up. It goes a long way on my channel. And if you want to hear more, please consider subscribing. Thank you, and I will see you in the Depths, or more accurately, Tempest Dungeon. Thank you.